I'm very, very excited to be here. It's really a nice opportunity to engage with our customers, with our partners. I do want to start off the conversation here very quickly with a question, and that is, how many of you use Amazon, right? I mean, basically everyone, I would assume. I may be surprised if no one uses it at all. For me, particularly, I'm a single dad with 3 kids. Amazon is vital to my life. It almost like runs my life, and it saves me time every single day. This is actually my subscribe and save page, and it saves me time from going to the store. And for me, time is my most precious resource by far, right? So if someone can give me some time back into my life to spend more time with my kids, spend more time doing work, spend more time, say, riding my bike, which is my passion, that to me is like invaluable. And from my perspective, the best companies in the world, the most impactful innovations in the world, do exactly that. They actually improve your life, give you time back, reduce mental stress, put a smile on your face. And that's the way I kind of think about innovations. That's something I want to talk about today. Another good example is Apple. So some of you may remember this commercial. This is actually from the 1984 Super Bowl. And it was kind of a George Orwell themed commercial. This is now a very famous commercial where this woman came running down into this theater and she threw this sledgehammer. The sledgehammer goes flying, smashes into the screen, and there's a big explosion. It's meant to signify a huge breakthrough, right? And Apple was correct. This was a massive breakthrough. They introduced the Apple Macintosh computer with this ad, and they were saying, hey, we're going to change the world. And they did. They absolutely did. The Macintosh computer changed how people interface with computers. It was dramatically easier to use. I mean, dramatically easier to use. It opened up the market very substantially and allowed people to do things that they really didn't realize they could do before with a personal computer. And I see email as a very similar thing. It was a huge breakthrough, a true huge breakthrough when it was originally introduced. Changed the world, changed the way people communicated with each other. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. We believe that email, even though it was a huge innovation 40 years ago, and there's been a lot of improvement since then, we think it's actually on a wave of the next generation of innovation and change, and it's going to change the world again. And we're going to go through some of that today. So one way we believe email is going to change the world again is this idea of making email dramatically more rich and powerful by creating a full web or app-like experience within email itself, so that you never need to leave the email in order to take whatever action you want to take. You want to book a ticket, you want to respond to a survey, you would like to purchase something, you want to discover and learn new things, you'll be able to do it all within email. And this creates a whole slew of different opportunities in terms of understanding the consumer, being able to personalize in a much more powerful way. Again, saving people time, saving people money, introducing them to new things, and putting a smile on their face, which is, of course, the goal. And before I talk a little bit about email, I want to talk about something else which is really important to me, and that's cycling. And I see a lot of parallels, actually, between the bicycle industry and the history of how it evolved and email. I think we can learn some interesting things from it. Actually, when I was first recruited over to SparkPost, one of the initial reactions I had was, well, you know, email, is email really interesting and new? Is this something I want to get involved with? And then as I started to dig in, I realized, wow, there is a lot of innovation coming, and this is really exciting, and it actually reminded me of exactly what happened in the bicycle industry, so I'll talk about that a little bit. The bicycle was actually introduced and invented in 1817, and you can see what this looks like. It wasn't very useful. Didn't even have pedals. You kind of had to push yourself along, you know, with your feet. So it was a novelty item. And then really it was in the 1860s when there was a major innovation, and that was actually adding pedals and a crank to the bicycle. And so this allowed people to actually start to move around, dramatically more efficient than walking, about 5 times more efficient than walking, 10 times more efficient than riding on a horse, which was a big deal. And of course, then you don't have to feed the horse or clean up the horse manure. So that was definitely a positive. And then by the 1890s, there were millions and millions of bicycles on the road. And actually, as you look at this slide, you'll see the bicycle is really not that much different from the 1890s as it is today. Very similar frame size, tubular tires. You look at the chain, the crank, all these different things. It's kind of amazing how similar it was today. But it was a humongous, humongous breakthrough, right? It became something that changed the way people operated, changed the way people moved around. It changed economic opportunities. It had social impact, and it also spawned a whole bunch of new industries, which is very similar to email. So Range Rover, for example, started as a bicycle company. Really, if you look at the automobile industry as a whole, a lot of the genesis of the automobile industry came from the bicycle industry. Range Rover actually came up with the first modern bicycle. And GM and Ford actually copied the mass production techniques that bicycle companies were using to use in mass producing the automobile. So it really was the beginning and the origins of the modern automobile industry today. And if you look at the airline industry or airplanes, the Wright brothers, who are widely credited with starting human flight, first started as bicycle mechanics and selling bicycles. So invention of gears and ball bearings and all these different things, a lot of these started with the cycling industry. And really the social impact that the cycling industry had was probably even greater in a sense. So this was fascinating to me as I researched the history of bicycles. Susan B. Anthony, who was one of the primary women's rights activists of the time, trying to secure women the right to vote, cited the bicycle as the single most impactful innovation that really emancipated women. And it was really for two different reasons. One, it allowed women to start to move around and get access to new economic opportunities and work, new social connections. And then in addition to that, it changed women's dress. Well, at the time, the fashion was to wear these corsets that were extremely uncomfortable, these big bulky gowns. And in order to ride a bicycle, they had to start to dress in a more comfortable manner. And actually bicycles spawned the whole movement towards bloomers, which at the time was very, very risque. This was underwear that actually went down to your ankle, which was risque at the time. But it really started this, and it had a huge impact on society in a major positive way. The bicycle industry over the next 110 years had incremental innovation. So carbon frames, you had shocks, you had disc brakes, you had digital innovation with platforms like Strava, which brought the cycling community together, and of course bicycling computers, which improved the user experience in a fundamental way. But it was really only in the last 10 years that there's been a huge wave of innovation around e-bikes or electronic bikes that have started to change the world again and really moved bicycling from a lifestyle choice to a default mode of transportation. And this was really enabled by advancement in battery technology and miniaturized electronics. And the proof is really in the size of the market today. So the e-bike market started a decade ago, or maybe even less, at zero. And last year was $21.1 billion in sales. 21.1 billion, absolutely amazing. In China, 20 million e-bikes were sold last year. Germany, 1 million e-bikes sold last year. 1 out of every 4 bikes sold were e-bikes. And it really has democratized transportation, right? It's made it accessible to everyone. It's removed a lot of this dynamic. We were actually having this conversation last night with the folks from Booking.com about how in Amsterdam, this idea of saving up to own a BMW doesn't really exist, right? Because you just ride a bike to work. Everyone can afford even some of the more expensive bikes out there, and it really has a major positive impact. And I see email having a very, very similar trend to what happened with bicycles, right? Bicycles, rapid adoption, changed the world, incremental innovation over time, and then another huge wave with e-bikes, which by the way is sweeping kind of from east to west, and now the US and the UK are starting to be early adopters. And so we can talk through a little bit about how email paralleled this exact sort of historical pattern of technology innovation. So the email was actually invented by Ray Tomlinson. Some of you may know this. He worked for ARPANET, and ARPANET was a military project. Actually, this was a side project for him. This was not even the core thing that he worked on. He just thought it would be something neat. And the original use case was simply to create a message that you leave on a computer. Someone else could log into that same computer later and get a message, right? Very, very simplistic. And it was in 1971 when Ray Tomlinson actually invented the idea of sending from computer to computer and introduced the @ symbol, sending it to someone at another computer. And that's when email really started to take off. And by 1976, about 75% of all traffic on ARPANET was email traffic. Email was one of the primary use cases which spawned the internet. Absolutely true. And by the 1980s, what happened is that ISPs started to pop up. And some of you may recall this. I'm probably dating myself a little bit, but I certainly recall it. Prodigy, AOL, CompuServe were all on the scene. And email really was not available to the public, even in the 1980s in any big way. The application and use case was primarily logging on to bulletin boards. I remember actually with my Commodore 64 when I was a kid, logging on to bulletin boards like Prodigy. You could leave messages for people, you could discover new things. It was pretty rudimentary, kind of the beginnings of the internet, but it was an open network and it evolved organically, and essentially anyone could create an ISP, anyone could get this thing going, which is one of the beauties of email, one of the beauties of the internet, is that no one person owns it, no one company controls it. And that's a very, very important aspect of why email's been successful. In the 1990s, this is where email as we know it today really became available to the public. And so you had Hotmail, which was the first free email service, emerged in the 1990s. Yahoo emerged in the 90s. And then of course AOL, who started to send CDs to the world to try and get people online. Literally, if you were in the United States at this time, you probably got 1 or 2 CDs from AOL per week in your mailbox. And this, it really is an interesting story. So Ted Leonsis and Steve Case, who are the founders and president and CEO of AOL, were investors in my last company. And Ted actually told me the story of deciding whether or not to send these CDs out to try and get people to come online. And he described it truly as a bet the company decision, and it almost bankrupted them. So they were sending out these CDs and it wasn't working. And finally they started to get traction. They started to get the model right. And ironically, email was built on the back of direct mail. That's how they really got people to sign up for AOL, and I always find that kind of interesting. By the 2000s, everyone's on email, right? So from 1997 to 1999 is kind of an amazing 2-year period in history. Internet users went from like 50 million users to 400 plus million in 2 years, 8x increase. Just a massive increase. Email becomes ubiquitous, and then of course what happens is the tragedy of the commons, right? Spammers come in, they start to degrade the experience. People are like, ugh, I can't even use my email inbox anymore. This is a classic example of spam. This is a Nigerian astronaut stranded in space. All you have to do is send $15,000 and you can help get him home. We all probably remember receiving spam messages like this. And we also had malware. So I don't know, who here remembers the I love you virus that went everywhere? A few? Greg does. There you go. You and I are the only ones, but malware was a humongous issue at the time. People were afraid of even opening emails, right? And then in addition to that, you had a situation where general marketing offers were just not relevant and interesting to you. And so it filled up your inbox and you're like, that this is kind of a disaster. And it was really in the last decade, in the 2010s here, that there's been incremental, steady improvement in email. A lot of this led by Gmail, making it much easier to decide when something is spam, make it easier for you to mark something as spam, or automate it for you, right? Put things into tabs so that you clearly organize your inbox without you even having to think, and then screen out malware and these different things, which has dramatically improved the user experience. It's kind of made email, it's brought email back in a sense, although email never went away. Email's steadily grown over the years and continues to be the #1 performing from an ROI perspective marketing and communication channel for brands. During these different periods, so in the 2000s, we had the rise of search and we had the rise of social. A lot of those technologies, a lot of those innovations came out of email. In the 2010s, of course, we have a lot of these different chat applications such as WhatsApp, Line, WeChat, you name it. And they all carved out, SMS, for example, carved out very important niches in the ecosystem, but email still remains very, very dominant for a number of different use cases, particularly in Europe and the United States. And going forward, we see a new wave of innovation coming in email. And when we think about it, we see it in two different places. One, this idea of making email rich and powerful, and encompassing everything you need to do within the email itself. And this is really powered by Google AMP, right? So Google AMP has done an amazing job, and they're continuing to develop that platform, and we're helping and working with Google on this as well and trying to make AMP very easy for our customers. But it allows you to do anything you want in the email and not have to leave it. What we see today is we see brands in many ways losing a huge percentage of their customers, what we call behind the click, right? So if you have to click on a link in the email and go to an app or go to the web, the fall off is dramatic. And if you can bring that action up into the email itself, we see the ability to increase conversion rates by, in some cases, as much as 10x, very consistently 100% or more. And so this is like a humongous impact, and it's not just about improving the experience for brands, it's also about improving the experience for consumers. The second piece of it is really next generation personalization and using huge amounts of data to be able to improve the experience for users and improve the performance for brands. So at SparkPost, through our both on-prem and cloud deployments, we see about 37% of all B2C and B2B email out there. And that creates this huge amount of exhaust data that we can use to really personalize, not using behavioral signals necessarily, and certainly not selling data, but using the data under the hood to make it a better experience. And so I'll give a couple examples here. So this is an email from Pinterest. This is a real email, and Pinterest is one of the early adopters of AMP, and they're sending out these emails today. And the difference between an AMP email and the prior methodology is that before it was static. So you would get an email from Pinterest, it would have a bunch of pictures, you would then say, oh, I'm interested in that, click on a link, you'd have to go to the website, you'd have to go to the app, and then you'd have to either log in or go through the whole process of remembering where you put your password and try and get to the information you want. Here, it's all encompassed in the email. You can discover new pins. You can search for new things. You can dig in deeper into multiple different levels. Really, anything you did on the web or an app, you can now do in email without ever leaving the platform. And it's truly a transformative experience you can share with others. I happen to be having, I know this sounds somewhat incredible, but it's true. I had a conversation as I was preparing for the speech with someone, and I was describing these new emails that Pinterest has been sending out, and they've been sending it to different cohorts of folks to experiment, do A/B testing. And the woman I was talking to was like, oh my God, I'm receiving these emails and I'm using Pinterest again. And I'm actually using it and sending it and sharing it with my friends. And her description was, it's just so easy. It just makes it so easy for me. And so really, from my perspective, again, this gets back to saving people time, saving people mental energy, making it easier for them to get what they want, to discover the information they need, and take action on it if they want to. We're trying to make this very, very easy for brands to be able to send AMP emails. So this is one of the first things that we've done, which is called SparkPost AMP Preview. And this allows you as a brand to discover very quickly how your email is going to render if you send it out via AMP. Also to be able to send test messages and understand very clearly how it's going to work on different platforms. So we've already enabled this. The next generation, we're going to be upgrading our AMP templates in a major way, and then also working on the back-end analytics. The amount of data that you can collect using AMP is dramatically different than under the old framework of email. And so we're instrumenting our platform over time here. It's not going to be tomorrow, but to handle those analytics for our customers. And we're really trying to make it ridiculously easy for our customers. A good example of next generation personalization, which we're working on, is sending emails when people actually want to receive them. So send time optimization has been around for a long time. And we've done a lot of tests on this. And what we've seen is that using first-party data, so your own data, we can get decent lift. Let's call it 12% median lift on engagement using send time optimization. But when we actually access our overall data footprint, again, this humongous data set where we're sending and seeing something like 37% of all B2B and B2C email, we're seeing 67% lift in engagement over the first-party data baseline, 67% lift. And this is huge. So again, not just improving the performance for brands, but also improving the experience for people, right? People want to get the email when they're actually engaging with their email application of choice. And they don't want it necessarily in the middle of the night, and then it gets buried and they have to try and go find it, or maybe they never see it. And we've definitely seen this really, really works. Another example is, these are relatively simple concepts, but it's sending emails that people actually want to receive, and don't send emails that people don't want to receive. I love this picture, which is someone who's totally annoyed. They're like, why the hell are you sending this to me? And what we've seen is that whether it's sending someone an offer that they're not interested in, or just sending them that 10th email when they only want to receive 9, we can use the data that we see in how people interact and behave with email and make predictive determinations as to whether or not sending that additional email is going to aggravate the customer and make it more likely that they put that email into spam, or that they stop engaging altogether. And by doing these analyses, we can give guidance to our customers to say, hey, send less email, you're actually going to have higher engagement. And we've seen as much as 4x increase in open rates, 4x, by using these techniques. And this is, again, early days. We're not going to have this application available on our platform for a little while, so I'm giving you preview into the long-term roadmap. But this is exactly where we're going. So when I think about where email's going, I do think about some of the most impactful, the best companies in the world, the most impactful innovations. You think about Apple, you think about Amazon, you think about e-bikes, which of course is something I'm excited about. And these companies, they connect people over time, and they actually improve their lives. They save them time, they save them money, save them mental energy, and they put a smile on people's face. And so we want you to join us in putting a smile on people's faces with the next generation of email and taking email to that new frontier. So thank you very much. I appreciate it.